The Galactic Concord hummed with the usual bureaucratic inefficiency of a 1,000-year-old institution run by species who considered paperwork an art form. Not the frame it and hang it on your wall kind of art, but more the we've been perfecting this particular brand of torture since before your ancestors figured out how to make fire variety. In the grand amphitheater of Nexus Station, representatives from 217 sentient species gathered for the quarterly diplomatic summit, each one convinced their particular grievance deserved priority status. "And now we welcome the representatives from Sol System," announced the moderator. A gelatinous Phloxian whose translucent body rippled with bioluminescent patterns that translated roughly to, "Let's get this over with so I can get back to my reproduction cycle." The human delegation entered with that peculiar mix of confidence and caution that had become their trademark in galactic politics. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 73 years ago, practically embryonic by cosmic standards. Yet they'd managed to irritate, impress, and confound the established order with remarkable efficiency. Leading the human contingent was their diplomatic attaché, a female of average height for her species, but with the kind of posture that suggested she could probably bench press her own body weight and run a marathon before breakfast just for fun. She moved with the fluid grace of someone intimately familiar with both formal ballrooms and combat zones. Her name was never properly pronounced by non-human vocal structures anyway, so throughout the Concord she was simply known as the Diplomat. "How generous of the Concord to finally acknowledge the presence of the dirt monkeys," rumbled Ambassador Krex of the Vargon Imperium, his 4-meter frame rising from his reinforced seat. The Vargons, essentially what you'd get if you crossed a rhinoceros with a mountain and then taught it to be exceptionally rude, had been particularly vocal about their disdain for humanity. The Diplomat smiled politely. Those familiar with humans might have noticed the smile didn't quite reach her eyes, which remained calculating and alert. "Ambassador Krex, always a pleasure to hear your unique perspective on interspecies relations." A ripple of nervous laughter circulated through the chamber. The Vargons were not known for their sense of humor, and Krex was particularly humorless even by their standards. His hide flushed a deeper gray, the Vargon equivalent of an angry blush. "The human delegation will present their petition regarding mining rights in the Arcturus sector," the moderator announced, clearly trying to move things along before the Vargon could respond. "We object," Krax interrupted, stomping one massive foot that sent vibrations through the chamber floor. "The humans have yet to complete the proper security attestation as required by Concord Regulation 7293B subsection 42. The Diplomat cocked her head slightly. "Our paperwork was submitted 3 standard cycles ago, Ambassador. Perhaps your aides overlooked it among the many forms required by the Concord." "Insufficient," Krex bellowed. "The human must be detained until proper verification can be completed." The moderator's translucent body pulsed with what might have been a sigh. "Is this really necessary, Ambassador Krex? The Security Council has already—" "The regulations are clear," Krex interrupted. "Or does the Concord now make exceptions for primitive species?" A tense silence fell over the chamber. The rules of the Concord were indeed clear, if ridiculously bureaucratic. The Diplomat glanced at her team, giving a subtle nod. "In the interest of diplomacy," she said evenly, "I will comply with the security protocols." 2 Zoraki security officers approached, their insectoid forms clicking with each step. They carried ceremonial restraints, more symbolic than functional, but restraints nonetheless. The shimmering energy cuffs encircled the Diplomat's wrists, linked by a short chain that hummed with a low-level containment field. "There," Krex said, satisfaction dripping from his rumbling voice. "Now we see the human in her proper place." The chamber had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even species that normally couldn't care less about human affairs seemed to sense the growing tension. The Diplomat stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable as Krex approached. The Vargon towered over her, his massive frame casting a shadow that engulfed her entirely. He leaned down, his hot breath reeking of the fermented root vegetables that comprised the Vargon diet. "Your species will learn its place in the cosmos," he growled quietly enough that only those nearby could hear. "You are nothing but clever animals playing with technology you barely understand." The Diplomat's expression didn't change. "Is there something else you wanted to add to the official record, Ambassador?" That's when it happened. Perhaps it was frustration at her calm demeanor. Perhaps it was calculated political theater. Whatever the reason, Ambassador Krex raised one massive three-fingered hand and struck the diplomat across the face with a blow that would have shattered the bones of many species. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Such physical violence was almost unheard of in Concord proceedings. The diplomat staggered but remained standing, a small trickle of crimson blood appearing at the corner of her mouth. The sound of the slap seemed to reverberate through the massive chamber, hanging in the air like a thunderclap frozen in time. Several of the more empathic species in attendance visibly recoiled, their natural sensitivity to emotional states making the shock and tension almost physically painful to endure. From the human delegation, a junior attaché half rose from his seat before a subtle hand signal from another team member made him sink back down. They had been briefed on multiple contingencies, and apparently this scenario had been anticipated. The junior attaché's expression shifted from outrage to something resembling anticipation. The Felician representative, a feline-derived species known for their exceptional observational skills, narrowed 6 golden eyes at this curious reaction. The humans were not responding with the expected outrage or diplomatic protestations. Instead, there was a strange calm emanating from their delegation, the kind of calm that experienced military commanders recognized as potentially far more dangerous than open hostility. In the upper galleries, several Concord security officers exchanged alarmed glances. The chief security officer, a veteran Torak whose scarred exoskeleton testified to centuries of maintaining order in volatile diplomatic situations, subtly signaled his team to heighten alert status. The Torak had fought alongside humans during the Skoro incursion 2 decades prior and had developed a healthy respect for their capacity for calculated violence when provoked. "The human provoked me," Krex announced to the shocked assembly. "I demand this session be adjourned while the Security Council reviews the incident." The moderator's body had gone almost completely transparent, a sign of extreme distress in Floxians. Floxians were renowned throughout the Concord for their neutrality and emotional detachment, which made this visible reaction all the more significant. The moderator had moderated over 300 diplomatic incidents in their career, including the infamous Jekal Pranir territorial dispute that had nearly erupted into open warfare on the chamber floor, and yet this relatively minor physical assault seemed to disturb them more profoundly. "Ambassador Krex, this is unprecedented. Physical assault during Concord proceedings is grounds for 10 minutes, the diplomat said quietly. Yet somehow her voice carried throughout the chamber. Krex turned back to her. "What did you say, human?" She straightened, wiping the blood from her mouth with her restrained hands. "I said 10 minutes. That's all I need." Something in her tone caused even the massive Vargon to pause. 10 minutes for what?" he demanded. The diplomat smiled, and this time it did reach her eyes. It was not a reassuring sight. 10 minutes until you're kneeling in front of everyone in this chamber. Krex's laughter boomed through the amphitheater, joined by nervous titters from various delegations. "You are even more delusional than I thought. Perhaps the blow addled what little brain you have." "Perhaps," the diplomat agreed pleasantly. "Or perhaps you've made a series of critical errors in judgment, beginning with not researching the background of the human you just struck." "Your background is irrelevant," Krex dismissed with a wave of his massive hand. "Is it?" The diplomat rolled her shoulders casually, as if working out a kink. "Before I was a diplomat, I spent 15 years in a special operations unit that specialized in first contact scenarios gone wrong. My particular expertise was in extracting personnel from hostile environments after diplomatic failures." A few of the more militarily inclined delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "You expect me to believe a diplomatic attaché is some kind of warrior?" Krex scoffed. "I expect you to do your homework, Ambassador. But since you didn't, let me educate you on a few things about humans." She took a step toward him, and despite the massive size difference, several observers would later swear that Krex leaned back almost imperceptibly. First, human bone density and muscle structure evolved on a high-gravity world with significant environmental pressures. That slap you just delivered? I've taken worse hits during recreational activities. Another step forward. Second, humans are one of the few species in the Concord with a documented history of successfully integrating combat and diplomatic functions. We don't separate our warriors from our diplomats as distinctly as most species do. She glanced at the energy cuffs around her wrists. Third, and this is important, Ambassador Krex, These restraints are calibrated for standard humanoid physiology, based on Concord averages. With a sudden twist and flex of her wrists that looked almost casual, there was a small spark, and the energy chain between the cuffs flickered and died. The cuffs themselves remained in place, but she was no longer bound. What the chamber at large couldn't see was the microfilament wire embedded in her diplomatic uniform's sleeve that had momentarily disrupted the energy field. A standard precaution for human diplomats that their security briefings euphemistically referred to as negotiation aids. The human delegation maintained the polite fiction that their diplomatic corps wasn't also extensively trained in escape artistry, tactical psychological warfare, and at least 3 forms of unarmed combat adapted for variable gravity environments. Such skills were simply considered basic preparation for a species whose first contact scenarios had historically ranged from slightly awkward to narrowly avoided extinction. The Arcturian ambassador, a being composed primarily of structured light and complex electromagnetic fields, registered the subtle energy fluctuation from the restraints and recalibrated their sensory matrix in surprise. According to their analysis, the human had manipulated the field harmonics with a precision that shouldn't have been possible without advanced technological assistance. Either the human possessed implanted technology that had somehow evaded the Concord's security scans, or their nervous system was naturally capable of manipulating energy fields at a much finer level than previously documented. Both possibilities were equally concerning. Human joints have a significantly greater range of motion than the Concord standard, she explained as if giving a routine lecture. Our wrists can rotate approximately 180 degrees, and our pain tolerance is, well, let's just say it's surprisingly high. The security officers moved forward, but the diplomat raised a hand. I'm simply demonstrating a physiological fact. The restraints malfunctioned due to improper calibration. I've made no aggressive moves. Technically true, though her entire presence had somehow become more threatening without any obvious change in posture. 8 minutes remaining, Ambassador, she noted calmly. Krex's nostrils flared. What exactly do you think you're doing, human? I'm negotiating, she replied. Just not in a language you were expecting. She turned to address the chamber at large. Esteemed delegates of the Concord, I'd like to direct your attention to Concord Charter, Article 47, regarding diplomatic incidents and cultural resolution protocols. The Chamber's information systems automatically displayed the relevant section on all delegate screens. As the injured party in this incident, I am invoking my right to seek resolution through cultural equivalent response. Her voice was clear and steady. I choose to invoke the Vargon tradition of Crothavian. A murmur swept through the chamber. The Vargon delegates visibly stiffened. You've no right, Krex bellowed, but there was a new note in his voice. Something that sounded remarkably like concern. The moderator's body rippled with uncertainty. The human appears to be within her rights, Ambassador Krex. The Crothaven is listed among your species' formal conflict resolution methodologies in your own cultural documentation. What exactly is this Crothaven? Asked the Talarian delegate, a feathered humanoid who always seemed fascinated by cultural minutiae. The diplomat smiled. I'm so glad you asked. The Crothaven is a traditional Vargon challenge dating back to their pre-space tribal period. When a physically superior individual abuses their strength against a perceived weaker party, the challenged has the right to select a test of their choosing. If the challenger refuses or fails, they must kneel in submission. Krex's eyes bulged. This is absurd. The Crothaean is an internal Vargon tradition. No outsider has ever... Article 47 is quite clear, Ambassador, the diplomat interrupted smoothly. The injured party may select any formally recognized conflict resolution protocol from the aggressor's cultural documentation. The Vargon delegation registered the Crothaven with the Concord Cultural Repository 73 years ago. I checked. 6 minutes, she added. Krex looked to his aides, who were frantically consulting their data terminals. One of them looked up and gave a slight nod that confirmed the diplomat's interpretation. Fine, Krex growled. What is your challenge, human? A test of strength? Combat? I will crush you. The diplomat shook her head. Nothing so primitive, Ambassador. My challenge is knowledge. She gestured, and one of the human aides stepped forward with a small device. This contains a series of questions about human history, biology, culture, and diplomatic positions. You struck me without bothering to understand even the basics about my species, so my challenge is simple. Answer 10 questions about humanity correctly. Krex's laugh held less confidence than before. This is your challenge? Questions? 10 questions, Ambassador. Get 6 right, and I'll withdraw my complaint entirely. Get 5 or fewer correct, and you kneel. Those are the terms of the Crothoven. The Vargan delegation huddled in urgent consultation, while the chamber buzzed with conversation. The moderator seemed uncertain how to proceed, but ultimately defaulted to the Concord's principle of honoring cultural resolution methods. Very well, Krex finally rumbled. Ask your questions, human. Let us be done with this farce. The diplomat nodded to her aide, who activated the device. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, visible to all delegates. Question 1. How many major nations existed on Earth when humans achieved faster-than-light travel? Krex snorted. Everyone knows this. There were 3. The United Americas, the Eurasian Coalition, and the Pacific Alliance. The display flashed red. Incorrect. There were 7 major political entities: the North American Union, the European Federation, the Russian Consortium, the African Alliance, the South American Cooperative, the Indo-Pacific Coalition, and the Middle Eastern Accord. Krex's hide darkened slightly. A trivial error. Question 2. What is the average human body temperature in standard Concord units? The Vargan hesitated. 310 units. The display flashed red again. Incorrect. Human average body temperature is 310.15 Kelvin, or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which converts to 309.82 standard Concord units. Murmurs swept through the chamber. Everyone knew the Vargons prided themselves on precision. Question 3. Name the human diplomatic initiative proposed at the last Concord session. Krex's eyes narrowed. The Resource Sharing Accord. Red flash. Incorrect. It was the Interspecies Medical Exchange Program. 4 minutes, the diplomat noted calmly. Krex was visibly agitated now, his massive frame tense. These are obscure details no reasonable being would be expected to know. These are basic facts about a species you just physically assaulted, the diplomat corrected. Shall we continue? By the 7th question, Krex had answered only 1 correctly. The chamber had grown increasingly uncomfortable as the Vargan's ignorance about a species he had publicly disdained became painfully apparent. Final question, the diplomat announced. What is the primary reason humans propose joining the Galactic Concord, as stated in our original application? Krex's eyes darted around, searching for help that wouldn't come. To gain access to advanced technology. The display flashed red 1 final time. Incorrect. The primary stated reason was to contribute to galactic peace and understanding through cultural exchange and collaborative problem-solving. The chamber fell silent. Krex had answered only 1 question correctly. Complete minute remaining, Ambassador, the diplomat said quietly. According to the terms of the Crotheum that your own people registered with the Concord, you are now required to kneel in acknowledgement of your failure. Krex stood frozen, his massive frame vibrating with rage and humiliation. I will not. The terms of the Crothoven are binding under Concord law, the moderator interjected, their translucent body now pulsing with authoritative patterns. Ambassador Krex, you must comply with the cultural protocol you yourself invoked when you struck the human delegate. The eyes of every species in the chamber were fixed on the massive Vargon. For several tense seconds it seemed he might refuse, potentially triggering a diplomatic incident that could fracture the fragile peace the Concord maintained. Then, with a growl that seemed to come from the depths of his massive chest, Ambassador Krex lowered himself to 1 knee. The movement was stiff, reluctant, and radiated hatred. But he knelt. The Crothoven is satisfied, the diplomat announced formally. I consider this matter resolved. She turned to face the Vargan, who remained on 1 knee, his eyes burning with humiliation and rage. Leaning slightly closer, she spoke in a voice pitched only for him. Next time you consider striking a human, Ambassador, remember this. We've spent our entire evolutionary history fighting things bigger and stronger than ourselves. We didn't get to the stars by being easy to kill. The message was clear, delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. The diplomat hadn't just defeated Krex, she had weaponized his own cultural traditions against him, and done so with such methodical efficiency that not a single Concord regulation had been violated in the process. The humans had studied the Concord's labyrinthine legal structure not just to navigate it, but to exploit its every loophole and provision when necessary. What none of the delegates knew was that this entire confrontation had been wargamed 6 months earlier in a classified simulation chamber deep beneath the human diplomatic compound on Earth. 12 possible scenarios, each with 37 potential branches, all meticulously analyzed by a team of game theorists, cultural anthropologists, and former military strategists. The diplomat had simply executed Scenario 7, Branch 22, with textbook precision. The Vargon ambassador's rage was palpable, a living thing that seemed to radiate from him in waves that the more psychically sensitive species in the chamber could actually perceive. The Melkorian delegate, whose species communicated partially through empathic resonance, had to activate personal shielding to avoid being overwhelmed by the emotional tsunami emanating from the kneeling Vargon. What made the situation all the more humiliating for Krex was that the human hadn't responded with force. There had been no physical combat, no show of superior technology or weaponry, just a methodical dismantling of his position using his own cultural framework against him. In Vargon culture, to be defeated physically was honorable. To be outmaneuvered intellectually was shameful. Stepping back, she addressed the chamber at large. Now, I believe we were discussing mining rights in the Arcturus sector. The moderator, clearly relieved that the situation had been resolved without further violence, quickly brought the session back to order. The diplomat returned to her seat among the human delegation as if nothing unusual had occurred, though many delegates noted she still wore the deactivated restraints like trophies. As the proceedings continued, the Tellarian delegate leaned toward his aide. "Did you record what just happened?" "Every moment," the aide confirmed. "Send copies to our military analysis division. I suspect we've been underestimating these humans." Throughout the rest of the session, not a single delegate interrupted or objected to the human proposals. The mining rights agreement passed with unprecedented speed and minimal debate. As the chamber began to empty at the conclusion, delegates from a dozen species approached the diplomat with invitations to private meetings and cultural exchanges. Ambassador Krex and the Vargon delegation departed without further comment, though the glares directed at the human contingent promised this wasn't the end of the matter. Back in the private human diplomatic quarters, the diplomat finally allowed herself to wince as she pressed a regenerative patch to her bruised cheek. "That was quite a performance," commented her senior aide, a veteran diplomat who had been with the human delegation since their admission to the Concord. "Though I'm not sure making an enemy of the Vargons was the wisest move," the diplomat shrugged, scrolling through the cascade of meeting requests that had flooded in following the session. "We already were their enemy. The difference is, now they'll think twice before showing it so openly." She paused, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And so will everyone else. You had this planned all along, didn't you? You knew he would react physically. Let's just say I did my homework on Vargon psychology and cultural triggers. They can't stand being corrected by lesser species." She tapped her communication device. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them Phase 1 of diplomatic realignment was successful. The Concord now sees us as something other than just technological newcomers." "What do they see us as?" the aide asked. The diplomat removed the energy cuffs that security had never come to retrieve and placed them on her desk as a souvenir. "As dangerous," she said simply, which in galactic politics is just another word for worth listening to. She scrolled through a series of classified intelligence briefs that had arrived during the session, pausing at a report on Vargon military movements near the contested Arcturus sector. Just as predicted, a Vargon battle group had been positioned to apply pressure during the negotiations, a show of force that would now be reinterpreted as a sign of weakness following Crake's humiliation. "What's our next move?" the aide asked, noting her attention on the military report. The diplomat closed the file and pulled up a holographic star chart showing trade routes connecting 17 systems. Small indicators representing resource flows pulsed along the ethereal pathways. creating patterns that resembled neural networks more than economic data. The Vargons were never our primary objective, she explained, expanding a sector that highlighted the territories controlled by the Zaraki hive, the insectoid security officers who had placed her in restraints. They were simply the most visible obstacle. With them publicly neutralized, we moved to Phase 2, strengthening our position with the Zaraki by offering them preferential access to our new agricultural techniques. The aide raised an eyebrow. The ones specifically designed for their biochemistry? The very same, the diplomat confirmed with a slight smile. Research we began developing the moment we learned they would be handling Concord's security protocols. Always prepare for both conflict and reconciliation simultaneously. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The diplomat activated the secure channel to reveal the holographic image of the human ambassador to the Concord High Council. A position technically senior to hers, though they both knew the actual power dynamics were considerably more complex. "Quite a performance today," the ambassador said, her expression a mixture of approval and concern. "Though I wonder if you might have been a bit too effective. The High Council has requested a formal briefing on human diplomatic methodologies." The diplomat's expression remained neutral. "Precisely as outlined in Phase 3 of the strategic plan, Ambassador. Once they acknowledge our approach as something to be studied rather than dismissed, we can begin introducing the trade reforms that actually matter." The hologram flickered slightly as the ambassador leaned forward. "And if they request access to our training programs, we give them exactly what they expect to see," the diplomat replied. "Conventional diplomatic protocols, with just enough human innovation to satisfy their curiosity without revealing our full capabilities." Later that night, after reports of the incident had spread throughout the station, the moderator received a private communication from the Concord High Council. The message was brief. Reassess human threat classification. Previous categorization. Emerging technological species with limited influence. New categorization. Diplomatic military hybrid with significant expansion potential. Monitor closely. The moderator's body rippled with the Floxian equivalent of a thoughtful frown as they filed the report. In their 1,000-year career moderating the squabbles of spacefaring civilizations, they'd seen countless species come and go from prominence in the cosmic order. Some rose through technology, others through alliances or resource control. The humans, it seemed, had chosen a different path. They weren't trying to outmuscle the stronger species or outthink the more advanced ones. Instead, they had mastered the art of turning their adversaries' strengths against them, of winning fights before they began. Deep in the private archives that only senior moderators could access, records detailed the rise and fall of dozens of promising species that had joined the Concorde with grand ambitions, only to be absorbed, marginalized, or reduced to client-state status. Within a few centuries, the established powers had refined the process to an art form, welcoming newcomers with elaborate ceremony while systematically dismantling their autonomy through economic dependence, technological restrictions, and cultural assimilation. The moderator called up classified footage from the human delegation's arrival at the Concorde 3 years earlier. The ceremony had followed the standard protocol: grand speeches, symbolic gifts, elaborate promises of cooperation and support. The senior human representative had smiled and nodded at all the appropriate moments, accepting the Concorde's guidance with apparent gratitude. But now, reviewing the footage with fresh eyes, the moderator noticed something they had missed. There was a quality to that human smile that matched the diplomat's expression today. Polite, attentive, yet containing something else. Something that said, "We see your game, we've played it ourselves for thousands of years, and we've already planned 10 moves ahead." The moderator closed the file and composed a personal addendum to the official report, marked for the attention of the High Council's inner circle only. Caution. Humans appear to have identified the assimilation protocol and developed countermeasures. Recommend immediate revision of standard integration procedures. These beings do not follow expected patterns for emergent species. As the moderator powered down their office systems for the night cycle, they couldn't help but wonder how the galaxy would look in a century, with these peculiar bipeds weaving themselves into its political fabric. One thing seemed certain: it wouldn't be boring, and somewhere in the depths of Nexus Station, a human diplomat with a healing bruise raised a glass of contraband Earth whiskey in a silent toast to the future, knowing that sometimes the most effective way to establish peace was to demonstrate precisely what you were capable of, if pushed. The amber liquid caught the light as she swirled it in the glass, a habit she'd picked up from her grandfather, a veteran of Earth's last continental war who had taught her that patience was a weapon more powerful than any fusion cannon. "Always let them throw the first punch," he'd told her. "Just make damn sure you decide when and where that punch lands." She reviewed the day's events with clinical precision, mentally cataloguing which species had shown subtle signs of support during the confrontation and which had betrayed flickers of concern at the human delegation's effectiveness. The Kithari representatives' neural filaments had pulsed with a pattern that their cultural database identified as respectful reassessment, while the Dazani trade minister had immediately forwarded a revised proposal for joint development of 3 previously contested systems. Most satisfying had been the message from the Zaraki Queen administrator herself, a formal request for a private audience to discuss mutual security interests that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. The security officers who had placed the restraints on her wrists were likely being reprogrammed at this very moment. Their hive's collective memory adjusted to recognize humans as potential allies rather than manageable newcomers. On her secure terminal, an encrypted message pulsed gently, the latest directive from Earth Command. She entered a series of biometric authentications before the contents resolved into legible text. The message was brief but significant. Phase 4 authorized. Proceed with Arcturus initiative. She smiled, a genuine expression this time. The pieces were falling into place exactly as projected. By this time next standard year, the Concorde's entire economic structure would be subtly but irrevocably realigned around human trade principles. A bloodless revolution that most species wouldn't even notice until it was already complete. The Concorde would adapt. It always did. But for the first time in centuries, it would have to adapt around humanity rather than expecting humans to conform to the established order. All it had taken was 10 minutes, and a lesson that would reverberate through diplomatic channels for years to come. Underestimate humans at your peril. After all, there's nothing quite like making someone kneel to get your point across.